Okay, Frank, we're focusing in this exhibition on your jazz photography, and I'd like you to talk a little bit about your childhood and the role music played in your life when you were a little kid, which kind of, I think, is reflected in what you've done as an adult.
Well, the thing, I grew up in the South, and I grew up in a house where there was music played all the time, either on a phonograph or a radio.
What kind of music?
Well, during the week, it would be rhythm and blues, what they call rhythm and blues. On Sunday, it was only gospel.
Okay.
So you had groups like, there was a group that Sam Cooke started out with. It was called the Mighty Clouds of Joy. And you had the Swan Silvertones and the Gospel Caravan and a lot of other gospel, just a lot of gospel. And there was one black radio station, it was called WDIA, and they played it all day. So we
All
had
day
to
Sunday.
listen. All day Sunday, yeah. So the rest of the week, you had the blues. You had the blues and jazz, what they call jazz. It was rhythm and blues.
Okay.
That was like race music, what they call race music back then.
Yeah.
So I would be listening to that. And my uncle would play jazz in the evenings. Like the first record I heard was Charlie Parker with strings. And it was great.
Okay.
And I actually listened to
He
it.
was playing on the phonograph.
Yeah, he would play that on the photograph. But then he would go into character and he would be all the musicians. You know, he had just come back from Korea, so he was a little off center.
Okay.
So he would play he would be Miles Davis, and then he would be Thelonious Monk, and then he would be Charlie Parker, and then he would be Dizzy, you know, and he would go through all of the machinations of everybody.
And you were knowing all these names. I mean, you were being
I didn't know any of
educated. You
these
didn't
names.
know
I'm
any of
5
these
years
names.
old.
You're
I didn't know.
5
I'm
years
just
old.
looking at him.
Okay, so you're just listening.
And I'm looking at him like he's crazy, you know, which he was crazy. But
Okay, all right.
he was like, you know, it was entertainment.
Okay.
But I'm listening to Charlie Parker with strings too, you know, while he's going through all of this, you know.
Got it. All right, so we're starting the show with a religious-based photograph, and part of the reason that it seemed like a good idea to start the show with this photograph was because of its relationship to your growing up. So why don't you talk about what we're looking at?
This is the Father Divine, the Daddy Grace, and it's in Harlem. This is 2009. And what they would do every year is baptize the congregation. And you have to be born again to be saved. So they would be born again every year. And this is a mass baptism with the Harlem Trombone Choir. So the title is God's Trombones.
Exactly.
Which goes back to James Weldon Johnson's Lift Up Your Voice and Sing.
Right. Talk a little bit about your education, about learning about photography, how you first got involved with photography. I always associate it with the March on Washington in 19...
Okay. No, it started earlier than that.
Okay.
My association with photography was with Phineas Newborn. He would go off Phineas Newborn was my stepfather, and he played the piano, and he was from Memphis. And we came up to New York together via Count Basie, and he played in Birdland, opposite Count Basie. So we lived together in New York in the late 50s. So he would go on tour and come back, and he would have all these photographs. He had a Minox camera, and he would project them. So we would sit up there and watch these projections. Slides, yeah. And he loved it, you know, he was into that.
Okay.
And he was gonna put a dark room together, and he had a enlarger that was up on the shiffer roll. Mm-hmm. And I would see that, it was in my room, and I would see that and wonder, you know, I thought it was something that you extract a tooth with all the time, because it looked like, you know.
Something from the dentist's office.
Yeah, something from a dentist's office, you know. So I always wondered how it worked.
Okay.
So that was my first introduction to like something to do with photography and cameras.
Okay. But then your first photographs that you took
Now,
yourself.
the first photographs was done in 1963 with my mother, March on Washington. with Martin Luther King and freedom fighters and freedom riders and all of that, and civil
March
rights.
on Washington for
Right.
Jobs and Freedom.
Right. Civil Rights Act. So I went down there with my mother and I borrowed her camera. She had a camera and she wasn't taking pictures. I said, let me take some pictures while we're down here. So I borrowed the camera and took pictures, took a lot of pictures. That was my first introduction to taking pictures.
So talk more about Phineas. This is later than your childhood.
So this is later. This is in the early 70s. And in the picture, that's Phineas playing at the bottom of the gate. And that's his childhood friend. They went to grammar school together, Jamil Nasser, who was George Joyner back in the day. He played the bass. And he was like an uncle.
All right, so why don't you talk a little bit about Roy DeCarava and the importance of him to your work?
So the first photographs I saw in a book was The Sweet Flypaper of Life by Roy DeCarava. Well, that's not true. The first photographs I saw was House of Bondage. You know that book?
Mm-hmm, I do.
By Ernest Cole?
Right.
And that influenced me a great deal with my other work, not so much with jazz work.
Right.
Roy DeCarava's work influenced me about jazz
Okay.
and how to shoot jazz. And it was The Sweet Flypaper of Life, his book, that influenced me a great deal on just how somebody can, in photographs, treat black people with dignity, that I had never seen before. Mm-hmm. Growing up in the South, when you see a person in the newspaper and he was black, he was either shackled, handcuffed, or hanging from something, Mm-hmm. So to see...
You were in Chicago when you saw Roy DeCarava.
I was in Chicago when I saw Sweet Flypaper, yeah. And Chicago was kind of a similar situation, That's why the photographers that I came up with got together and we didn't like the interpretation of black people in the media.
Right.
So we started taking our own pictures of black folks.
Right. Robert Sensak, particularly.
Yeah, Bobby Sensak, yeah, his family owned the Chicago Defender. So that was a means to get our views out to the public. Mm-hmm. And he was the first influence, first one I saw taking pictures.
Okay.
He and Johnny Simmons. Mm-hmm. Johnny Simmons was instrumental too now. Mm-hmm. Let's not leave him out.
No, I won't leave Johnny Simmons.
And then at Fisk, I would audit his classes and I'd go to the dark room and watch him the way he printed.
Mm-hmm. This is Sensak.
Sensak, right.
Sensak. And what was Johnny doing there? He was a student, but he was assisting?
He was a student, but he was the assistant. Yeah.
Okay. And so how is all of this reflected in some of these photographs? I mean, the beginning of the show is called The Players because essentially they're portraits of one sort or another, of individual stellar figures in the jazz world, all of whom you know.
They all played, yeah. Well, I know some of them. I don't know all of them. I didn't know the blues singer here. I didn't know. I met Keisha, but I didn't know her. The rest of them I know pretty good, except maybe Max.
Okay.
Max Roach, I didn't know him that well. And Kerry Smith, I didn't know that well. But the rest of them I knew pretty good.
Well, talk about the ones you knew well.
The ones I knew well. Well, this is Oscar Brown, the third. No, it's Oscar Brown Jr. and the third. So the third's nickname was Bobo, and I grew up with him in Chicago. Oscar Brown was from Chicago, and he was like a big force too, in terms of the way he approached music, popular music, and the blues. So I liked taking pictures of them whenever I could. This was in a place called Carlos 2.
Right, in the village.
Yeah, this guy from the Caribbean owned 2 restaurants, mm-hmm. and one of them he had jazz in. Ahmed used to play in there too. Mm-hmm.
And you have, it seems to me, an ability to get really close to the performers or the vocalists, and
for some
talk
reason,
about your ease and doing
for some reason they like me. And somebody like Roy Haynes here,
yeah.
he told somebody one time he was the second greatest jazz drummer in the world.
The first being?
The first being Max Roach, the guy that's right next to him. And when Max passed, I guess he became the best, the greatest.
And he's in his 90s now, and you're still in touch with him, I think?
I'm not in touch. I'm in touch with his family, not with him. You know, he's kind of got a little dementia now. I met him when I was 7 years old, and he did a classic album called We Three with my stepfather, Phineas. And they practiced in our living room on 91st Street. So he used to remember all of that. He doesn't remember any of that now. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But his daughter and his son does. Mm-hmm. I don't think they were even alive then.
Got it.
But they know all about that. Mm-hmm. And we become close. Me and his daughter are very close. Mm-hmm. Leslie.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about, you don't crop your images. What we see is what you shot.
Yeah, I crop in the camera.
And so talk about that and your sense of composition with a photograph like this or like that,
Well, I try, there's a criteria for great art. And, mainly it's balance and form and space. So I always try to do that.
Let's talk about your shift from, most of these are black and whites. Let's shift to when you started using color. I know you're still doing both, but
Well, the thing about black and white and color, I shot color all the time. Mm-hmm. From the beginning, I just didn't show it, but I shot it. And I had color teachers in college, Jay Maisel, Joe Meyerowitz, Stephen Shore.
Why didn't you show it?
I just never showed it. It cost a lot to print it. The black and white I could print myself. So
okay.
Cost was a big part of not showing color.
Okay.
You had to do, and for it to be really beautiful color, it had to be dye transfer, and that cost a lot of money. Okay. So we didn't do it. It wasn't. I did some of them, Cibachromes. Mm-hmm. I could do it myself, and you had to roll it and everything. Yeah. But basically, I just did black and white until the digital image came into play. And then that's a game changer.
Well, that kind of started around 2013 in terms
for
of
me.
Your focus for
me.
you.
But I was shooting in the beginning too, but it was like, I can't do anything with this. Mm-hmm. The pixels were just too small and resolution wasn't that great. But I started shooting back then too, but it wasn't good.
Okay, so what about these three? Three of them.
There was no way you could tell me that this was going to take over like it has.
Okay, and it has, but this is the most recent photograph in the show.
That's the most recent, yeah.
So why don't you talk about that one?
These two guys were in Winton's band, the septet, when I first started in '89. So I have a long history with Wycliffe Gordon and Herlin Riley. And Herlin Riley was like my best friend in the band. We were the oldest. Not only that, Herlin kind of started out with Ahmet too. Uh-huh. So he was, right after I left, Herlin came into the band. So we had a lot in common.
So you were with Ahmet right after you got out of school, around 1975, 76?
75, 76, right.
Okay.
Right. 2 years with him.
Okay, carrying the instruments. And why don't you talk about all that aspect of what you did?
He called me his old road manager. But I was the schlepper.
Got it.
You know what schlepping is?
I know what schlepping is, yeah.
So
got it.
We had this raggedy van and everything went into it. This the bass, the drums, the Fender Rhodes. Fender Rhodes, the first keyboards, electric keyboards were like, I think they were not heavy. Uh-huh. It was like moving a piano around. Uh-huh. They were very heavy.
Okay.
So,
But what about the expressiveness of Kupti there? I think that's such an amazing...
He was talking about a friend of his who his wife had just died, and he had these kids to consider now, and he was crying. He was actually crying while he was singing this song. And this other guy up here is Ulysses Owens, and I've been knowing him since he was a freshman at Juilliard. So they all have something to do.
Yeah, you said he was the first jazz Juilliard.
Yeah, he was in the first class with
Mm-hmm.
Victor Goins when Victor was the director.
What about Roy Hargrove? That's
Yeah,
such-
Roy just passed this year, and that's a big loss for us. And I've been knowing Roy since he was like 16.
Come closer to the photograph.
I've been knowing Roy since he was 16. And he was just a phenomenal talent. He was like prodigy on the trumpet. We hadn't seen anything like that in a long time. We never seen anything like that again.
And what about in terms of the photograph per se, the mirror? You seem often to be photographing situations where windows and mirrors and doors, not only in your jazz photographs, but in all of your photographs.
Well, I like reflective surfaces, and a mirror is like the quintessential reflective surface. It sees everything it sees. It sees everything that you see that it sees, and the camera sees it too.
And it's also showing an otherwise hidden aspect of the space that you're in.
Right,
It seems
right.
That's
And
one of the ways you
get-
layer things.
You get to see in back of things and around things, and
Right.
that you would never see if that mirror wasn't in the place that it's in.
And
Yeah.
we'll see that in a lot of the photographs in the show.
This is a silhouette of Marcus Roberts, and he's blind. So what I was trying to do is like let you see that it's just the outline of him. And that's kind of what he deals with, outlines of things. And but he's a genius too on the piano. And he was like a prodigy too when he was coming along. And so was Sharnette Moffett. And this guy played with Ron Carter played with Miles Davis. And this guy was like a prodigy, Sharnette Moffett. When he was 16, he was just already a phenomenal bass player.
Seemed to me you once told me that what interested you in the Ron Carter frame was the ring.
Well, I knew his wife well because I knew her uncle. She had an uncle named Hasbrock, and they were from Syracuse. I knew her uncle in Chicago, and he would always tell me about his niece was married to Ron Carter.
Okay.
So when I got to meet him, it was in the early 80s. And he always told me he wanted to reproduce the album that Phineas and Roy Haynes did called We Three. And could I set that up? I said, yeah, man, I set that up. But his wife, Janet, was into the arts, and she had a gallery in her house. And I was the photographer for the gallery.
Okay.
So she had recently passed, and he was still
Mourning.
he still had her ring. So I was focusing on that ring
Yeah.
in this picture.
Yeah. It seems to me so much of these photographs have to do with the situation at the moment and memory and looking forward, and that's part of the layering, and that your knowledge of the families of everybody and your own family history
Right.
plays such
Well,
a big part.
jazz is a big family. It's just a big you can either play or you can't play. Or if you play, everybody knows you and knows that you can play. So you meet the people that can play first, and then the people that can't play, they're around.
Okay. Yeah.
So the people that can really play are like professionals,
So why don't we go talk about Miles, which is one of your, I would say, most famous photographs?
Yeah, that's one of my
you
famous
think?
photographs. Yeah, definitely.
Talk about the situation. Talk about your knowledge of Miles.
Well, I want to talk about his sister first. I lived right next door to Miles' sister in Chicago. Yep.
When you were with your grandmother.
When I was with my father and my grandmother, yeah. But I was living with my father then in Chicago, and Miles' sister lived right next door. Her name was Dorothy. And growing up, she was like my aunt. You know, I was over there all the time. In fact, her husband kind of taught me how to cook barbecue.
Ah,
His name was
okay.
Uncle Vince Wilburn, Sergeant Captain Vince Wilburn. He was in the Army. He was like a career Army person. And we loved him. And Miles would come there, and whenever he was in Chicago, he would stay with them. So I would see Miles sometimes. I was a little boy. But, you know, he would always talk. You know, hey, how you doing? Yeah, I'm all right. How you doing? And I'd be like, man, it looks like Miles Davis. You know, he would always be dressed in a suit and everything. So.
And where are you here?
This is when he came back. He was sick for a while, and then he came back. He was making a comeback, and this was at the Cool Jazz Festival, 1981 in New York City at Avie Fisher Hall. So these were some of the people. M. Tume is Jimmy Heath's son, who played the congas with him.
Okay.
And there are a lot of people in here I knew. Alambe Brathwaite. He was an intellectual and a Harlemite.
Well, you kind of knew everybody through your mother as well as
Oh
your
yeah, my
siblings.
mother was like
Talk
a jazz. She was like a jazz hag, and she knew everybody, and she hung out all the time. And she booked acts for Presbyterian Jazz Society in Mount Vernon.
Ah, okay.
So she was very much in the families. And she was very much jazz was always in the family.
Right. And what about the Polaroids of the Jazz at Lincoln Center musicians?
So
You've been with Jazz at Lincoln Center since
89,
really the beginning.
Yeah, since '89.
Yeah.
That's when we were beginning. And it really started in '87, but we came in '89. And these are some of the guys that are in there now, basically. And I took some pictures of Winton's family, his daughter, basically. And he loved it. Oh man, we should do this with the guys. So we set up this whole scenario with the guys.
Who decided the poses? Who
I
decided?
did. I
You
did.
did.
Yeah.
Okay.
Not only that, I did it like Irving Penn in the corner, you know, so that everything is going toward the center of the. So all of the sides are going towards the center.
Okay.
Because there's a corner in back of them, right?
And whether they're holding the instrument or acting like they're holding the instrument was your decision.
Right. Except, you know, he started doing what he wanted to do, and it came out beautiful.
Ali.
Ali, yeah. Right.
Yeah. I love Dan Nimmer with the piano.
Yeah, he's playing, and here's Kenny actually with his horn, and Paul with his horn.
So in this case, eventually there will be some of the cameras you used early in your career, which we're just about to set up.
This one I definitely used. It's a German Kodak. This one I used. It's an old F with a photomic head. And these are beautiful cameras.
And the photomic head meant the light meter?
There was a light meter inside, yeah, one of the first light meters inside the camera.
And each of them did a specific thing for what you wanted to do. So you always, once you could, carried several cameras with you, so you could.
Very well made cameras. It's all metal now. They're all plastic and they fall apart. Not that falls apart, but.
Yeah, okay.
And this is all metal and it's one piece. So they made them differently back in the day. Also, W. Gene Smith, well, he shot with that too. But he shot with Leicas and he shot with OFs, Nikon Fs.
So on stage, off stage, on stage, it seems like your work with Jazz at Lincoln Center, you're traveling with Jazz at Lincoln Center around the world, really gives you an intimate view of the musicians that most people don't have. In some ways, I love those photographs because they all show me something I've never seen before.
Like what?
Backstage.
Oh, backstage,
you know?
okay.
Just,
Now
what happens backstage, what it looks like backstage.
What
So
they're
could
doing
you
backstage.
talk about that a little bit?
I did a book on Winton, right? Sweet Swing Blues on the Road. for Norton, W.W. Norton. And that kind of morphed into when he became director at Jazz Lincoln Center. I came over with him after the book was finished.
Right.
I just came over with them, and since he was already like a brother to me. We just, became like a married couple then.
I see.
An old married couple. So
The odd couple.
yeah, the odd couple. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, these are indicative of what it looks like behind the scenes and after the scene. This one is people lining up to take pictures with him. And again, it's through a mirror so that you can see what's going on in back of me and see what's going on in front of me and to the side of me. And this one is, he went and irons his own clothes every day. And it's like therapy just before he goes on. So he gets that quiet time to iron his suit and his shirt, his pants, and it's very therapeutic for him. So that's what these is about.
And what's this one about? This is another one of the
This is, in the beginning, the orchestra was made up of the surviving members of Duke Ellington's orchestra. So these young guys didn't really know how to play swing music like Duke Ellington and Count Basie. So they employed the people that really knew how to play. So it was these old guys, Norris Turney and Brett Woodman, Milt Grayson, and some various other, Hamilton and various other cats that were still living at the time.
right.
And, they would all be on time all the time. They would have their flask, it was called an eye opener in the morning, get on the bus, and they already had a cocktail or two.
Yeah.
These guys would be coming in with their hoods on and their sweatpants, and
The young guys.
they would be like 30 minutes, an hour late. And oh man, these guys would jump in their butts about that. Hey man, look, this is professional. You messing with our time here. You got to be on time. Try to be on time.
Yeah.
Right.
What about all the photographs backstage? Is that kind of typical that wherever you are backstage?
No, this was a photographic studio.
Okay.
I forgot the guy's name. Elgort, Arthur Elgort,
Okay.
down in Soho.
Okay.
So he was a jazz photographer, and he had a studio, and these are all the people he photographed.
Okay. And why are they there? To be photographed as well?
They're being photographed for Vogue.
Okay.
So I was happened to be there too.
Okay.
I think I got the better picture.
Oh, I'm sure. No doubt.
So I'm trying to break up the space with all of these, with the mirror and what's in the mirror and what's around the mirror and on the walls, all the guys on the wall, these guys that are in front of the wall, circles with the chairs.
Chairs are important to you. You spend a lot of time with chairs in the jazz work and in the other work as well. Actually.
Chairs and bicycles, because of the circles.
Got it. And the four tenors, again, that seems like such an intimate scene of people playing and...
Well, these guys are so famous too. Even if people don't know them, they're famous in the jazz world. Johnny Griffin, Teddy Edwards, Vaughn Freeman, and Joe Lovano. Four tenors. I think Johnny Griffin plays the alto though. He might have been playing the tenor though. Looks like he's playing the tenor. Yeah, they are four tenors.
And who's embracing? And
that's Winton hugging Ernest Gregory. He hadn't seen in a while. So that's how cats do, when they haven't seen each other in a while, they hug each other. Yeah, bro,
one
how
arm,
you doing?
I love it.
Yeah.
Always one arm
they
around.
They hug each other.
Yeah.
Right.
There's a kind of warmth, the way you were talking about earlier about the family situation.
It's a brotherly love,
Yeah. And then this is another of the sort of monumental photographs.
Yeah, this one comes from It's called Blood on the Field. And this is after the show. This is after everything is over. He's walking off stage, and it's kind of like a second line. So it's called Stomping the Blues,
Got it.
which is a throwback to Albert Murray's book called Stomping the Blues.
Right.
It's a wink at Albert Murray's book
Yeah, yeah.
called Stomping the Blues.
Right. Great.
And Albert Murray was a big influence on all of us
Yeah.
in terms of
Me too.
how he felt and how he wrote about
Yeah.
the music.
Well, and also how he wrote about art and Bearden,
How
and
he-
the whole
yeah,
connection
wrote-
with Bearden.
His whole
Yeah.
connection with Bearden. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's how I met him.
Yeah. Yeah.
I met him long before
Yeah.
any of this
That's how I
happened.
met him too.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Where are they?
This is at Harvard. I'm at Yale in New Haven.
Okay. Great. So the next section of the show is called Making Music, and it's really, we started out with individual figures, and this whole group are two or more figures. And so why don't you just choose which ones you want to
Well,
focus on?
this one is about breaking up space. So there's something happening in each segment of the space. You know, there are people in one section. There's Winton and the trumpet in one section. There's Reed and piano in the next section.
I was also seeing the interior of the piano.
Right. Seeing the interior. You're seeing the reflection.
I mean, one of the things I've learned from you in terms of looking at your work is that every single inch of the space
I try
is
to utilize.
attended to.
I try to utilize every inch of space.
And if it doesn't work for you, they're the ones that don't work. I mean, that's what
That's
you
the-
point out, is this one's
you-
not
hey.
good enough.
And long ago, you know, I don't crop. So if I can't work it out, I work it in. Or if I can't work it in, I work it out.
Got it.
You know,
Yeah, yeah,
whatever it is to get out,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
I work them out.
yeah. And in terms of legendary figures, these two seem
Oh,
to
this-
be as great as they get.
Yeah, this is Dexter Gordon. When he came back from Europe, he had a long hiatus in Europe, like maybe 10 years or so, maybe even more. So he was coming back to the States, and there was a big, all through the jazz world, it was like, Dexter's coming back, man. Dexter's coming back. So when he came back, this is in New Orleans, at the Jazz Festival in New Orleans. And Dizzy loved him, you know, his bebop.
Yeah, yeah.
And so this is Dexter and Dizzy playing together in New Orleans. And of course, you know, these guys are great. It's Lionel Hampton and Carter. What's Carter's first name? King Carter. They called him King. Benny Carter. Benny Carter. He played the trumpet for a long time. When he couldn't play the trumpet anymore, he started on the alto. But he made his reputation on the trumpet and on being a band, on being a band leader and a composer and arranger.
And that's at Jazz at Lincoln Center.
This is a Jazz Lincoln Center, yeah. And they don't get any more bigger than Lionel Hampton. He played with Benny Goodman in one of the first integrated bands.
Right. Right.
So jazz is all inclusive. Either you can play or you can't play, and it doesn't matter if you're white or black, you know. And if you can play, everybody wants to play with you. Like Louis Armstrong, everybody wanted to play with Louis Armstrong. And these guys, Warm Daddy and the House of Swing, this is up at Jazz at Lincoln Center, early, 96.
And so what's happening here, the sense of movement that's going on in that photograph? is
So I'm
pretty
shooting off
extraordinary.
of somebody else's flash. My battery had gone out. So I'm shooting off this lady next to me named Enid Farber. So she's, you know, and she's a professional. So when you are shooting with a professional, you can kind of time when they're going to shoot. Because you know they're going to shoot pretty rapidly. So I timed her flash off of my camera. So that's why you get this like effect
Of motion.
of motion, yeah, of movement.
Yeah. Pretty amazing.
And stop, yeah.
But there again, this is another intimate view of two people in conversation.
Yeah, these guys are legends too, both of them. One is Art Blakey and the other is Walter Davis Jr., who was a good friend of mine, Walter Davis Jr. I didn't know Art Blakey that well, but I knew his people around him, and I knew his son real well. But that's a whole nother story.
There's always another story.
That's a whole nother story. His son, the son that I knew, is a whole. I knew a bunch of his kids actually.
But I mean, in a way, the photographs say that too. That there's a whole nother story. You feel like there's a whole level of what's not there that is there by implication. Yeah.
Right.
Which I think is part of what is important to you.
This was called Walking the Bar. They were talking about. This was a Jazz for Young People concert. And they're talking about Coltrane, who was Coltrane. So back in Philadelphia, Coltrane would have to play in bars. You know, these cats would play in bars when they were first coming up. And they would have to do all kind of stuff to entertain people. So this was one of the things that they would do on top of a bar. They would play all down, laying down on, you know, on their backs, on their stomachs, you know, standing up, upside down.
Yeah.
That was called Walking the Bar.
Yeah.
So this was a rendition of Walking the Bar.
And who is it?
No, Walter Blanding.
Walter Blanding,
Walter
isn't
Davis.
it? Yeah.
Walter Blanding
Walter
Jr.
Blanding Jr.
And he's a junior,
Yeah. Who's now in Shanghai?
Who's now Dizzy's in Shanghai. He's representing us in Shanghai, and he's doing a great job.
Yeah.
Right.
And talk about the second line. This kind of takes me back to the sense of religion in the first photograph, the big color photograph.
So the thing here is about New Orleans' second line. And this is pretty much the first line. When they go out. So what happened is the people wouldn't give them insurance. They couldn't find insurance back in the day. So they banded together and they formed their own social clubs. And it was basically to bury people. So the social club had its own band so that they not only could bury people, they could send them out right. So this is part of, that's Danny Barker and these guys. And they would send them out. They would go to the grave with a dirge, right? Slow, they would walk to the grave. They put the body in the ground. Then life would begin again. So it's called second line. So the tempo would be upbeat and everybody would be dancing.
Got it. So this is the first line on the way to the grave, not the second.
That's on the way to the grave. They're inside the graveyard.
Okay. And so the second line starts when you leave the graveyard.
Second line starts when you leave the graveyard.
Got it. Okay.
Life begins again.
Got
So
it.
it's all up and, you know, it's didn't he ramble and stuff like that.
Yeah. And I think this is amazing. So will you please talk about what you were doing to take this photograph?
So I'm down on the ground. This is in Bradley's. Like this is one of the quintessential jazz clubs back in the 80s, right? All the cats would come after their gigs and they would come to Bradley's like 2, 3, 4 in the morning. So this would be all night. And we would had just a great time. It was a piano bar actually, but the piano players would bring their friends. Phineas played there a few times. He played there a few times. And his brother played there, Calvin Newborn played there. But these guys, this is Jerry Gonzalez, Kurt Lacey, and Pate. Don Pate.
The whole sense of space that's in there.
So I'm bouncing the flash off the ground. So that's why it's kind of illuminating the under the arm and the faces.
But the scale of the figures, I mean, he's so huge and he's so small.
Yeah, because this is a wide angle lens I'm using, a 28. So he's the closest thing to me, so he's going to be much bigger than everybody else. But again, I'm trying to fit everybody into their space.
Right.
Everybody has a space that they fit in. His face is fitting in that space, holding down this whole positive space.
And that concern, it seems to me, comes out of your study of painting as much as photography. You
It
want to
does,
talk a
it
little
does.
bit about your time with Bearden, your time with Jack Whitten, and its impact on your photography?
Well, you know, Bearden never talked to me about learning how to paint. You know, I just looked at what he was doing. And that's how I learned about spatial relationships and what he was doing, how he froze space with the German sensibility and the Flemish sensibility. And
But you did go to some of his lectures,
I
so if
did
he
not-
didn't talk to you directly, you did hear him lecture on these
Yeah, I
things.
heard him lecture. He wasn't talking to me, but he was talking to the multitude. Yeah, I went to a bunch of lectures with him.
Okay.
In fact, I
Okay.
took him
Yeah.
to a bunch of his
Yeah,
lectures.
yeah.
One series at Harvard.
Mm-hmm.
No, one series
Yale.
at Yale, right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, well, you know, I would hear a lot about art from him. Not only that, I would hear a lot about art of other people from him, like Picasso
Right.
and Matisse and all of these guys.
Well, I've always taken that that your interest in everybody and everything, in a sense, was stimulated to some degree by the time you spent with Bearden as a very young artist.
Right. But you know, back in those days, I kind of took that for granted since I was around him all the time. You know, I just got things from him through osmosis.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, well, that's the best way, maybe.
Yeah. It wasn't even that I was looking to learn anything. It was coming at me all the time. You know, he and Murray.
Yeah. Let's go into the musical instrument room, even if the musical instruments aren't up yet. This gallery is called The Tools, and I kind of think of it as some of your most abstract photography. And I think the whole issues of abstraction are really important to you, you know, such as that, where you're really dealing with line and color way more than you're dealing with who is playing those instruments and the role of the mutes. And you mentioned earlier your interest in the circle because of chairs. And so you want to talk about those a little bit?
Influence of Jackson Pollock's work in terms of just the line becoming the form, the line itself becoming a form, instead of breaking up space with form, you're breaking up space with just the line. So that's what this is about.
Right. And this is Winton's mutes.
These are Winton's mutes. Yeah, that's early too.
Yeah.
Oh, 91,
Yeah. Why does he have so many?
They do different things. You can actually, this is like a jaw, and he actually talks with that. You know, and you get different sounds. The bucket mute, you different kind of velvet sound with that. These pixie mutes and harmon mute. They all do different jobs.
Yeah. Do you play any instrument?
Yeah, the camera.
The camera. Yeah. Okay. Well, then why don't we go into the collaboration area?
What was the collaboration?
I think is one of the really, really, really interesting aspects of the show. And collaboration was meant to mean both working with multiple groups, as we have in some of the photographs, but also the issue of education, which you've talked about a little bit, the way the senior musicians were trying to get the younger ones to be professional. And here we're really dealing a lot with children in some of these photographs.
The thing about learning how to play jazz is back in the old days, you had to learn on the bandstand. There was no way you could go to a school and you could learn anything about jazz. There was no jazz programs, you know. Your jazz program was in a jazz club, you know. You had to go there and listen, and then you had to practice your scales, and then you had to come up there and get up there and get kicked off and, you know, go back up there, you know. Go back home and shed. It's called, that's where the shedding came from, woodshed, you know. You go to the woodshed and you practice.
Yeah.
That's what that is. So now you can go to these programs in these high school, grammar schools, middle school, and if you're a kid, you can actually learn from real professional jazz musicians how to play. So this is what this is all about. It's called Swing Central, which is in Savannah, Georgia, at the Savannah Music Festival. But this is Germany, and they had a whole symphony playing Winton's work around his orchestra, which is down there, and they choreographed movement to it, which is down there.
So this photograph from Berlin is done at the same time as the photograph of Winton with the children in their hands. It's the same time in Berlin. Yeah.
Same day.
Yeah.
In Berlin.
And there's very much a sense, well, you can tell here that it's very important to Winton to be training the next generation.
Well, he's starting at an early age. This is called the one-note spasm band. And he's very much, in fact, we have a whole program called We Bop, where we get them, they don't even talk, but they come in and they play. They bang on stuff and they shake stuff and they blow in
the little kids.
Kids, like infants, yeah.
We Bop.
We Bop.
W-E-E.
Yeah, like We Bop. Instead of bebop, We Bop. Yeah.
Got it.
It's a whole program. And this is done in Cuba, and they have serious programs of learning how to play instruments. Not learn how to play jazz, but learn how to play instruments. Like very classical training from Russians in Cuba. And everybody can play. They just can't swing, but they can play. So we're going down there with programs to teach them how to swing. And once they get that rhythm down, it's gonna be.
Well, the time I was with you, the Jazz at Lincoln Center musicians were teaching in the conservatories and doing concerts with the kids. It was fantastic.
Once they learn how to get their rhythm section together, because they can already play.
Yeah.
They can already, I mean, it's phenomenal.
And very young.
Very young, they start really young there. Not only that, the government subsidizes musicians down there. So if you're a musician, you get more money than just the average cat on the street.
Right. And you worked at the Savannah Music Festival for more than a decade also. You were
18 years.
18
years, yeah.
And that was 3 weeks every spring.
3 weeks. End of March, beginning of April, every year.
And not much of that was with children, but there was some children element every year? Or was
they had a bunch of, in the beginning, they had a bunch of stuff. They would bus children in, and they would have classes in auditoriums. They got too costly.
Yeah, like everything.
But they have Swing Central down there, which is a high school jazz competition.
Okay.
And that got better and better every year.
Okay.
Like essentially Ellington did in New York.
Okay. And so the end of the show is a section called The Changing Face of Jazz, which really focuses, for the most part, on your large-scale digital photography. But it also, I think, shows great differences in what's possible with color photography, very different kinds of color photography.
Right now, I would never be able to take these kind of pictures back in the day just with conventional color negative film. First of all, you couldn't get color negative film to look like this that was that fast. It would have golf ball grain in it. And so this digital imagery is changing the whole way photography looks now. Jazz photography.
And this is Blood on the Fields also.
This is 2013 though.
Right.
This is a redo of Blood on the Fields.
But that connects with Stomping the Blues in that relationship.
Yeah, see, this is the end. So he's doing the same thing, and it's the same guy. This is Victor, which is right in back of him in the other photograph. And that's him up front.
So that's a great relationship between the black and white in '96, I think, and this,
And Stompin' the Blues.
basically the same subject.
Right, right.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, yeah. A lot of silhouetting happening
A lot of
here.
silhouette, yeah. So this is a throwback to Roy DiCarava, you know, this image right here. The way he approached the form.
There's a little bit of sense that everything you've ever learned stays with you all the time.
It's all right here, you know. It come, as soon as I see it, there it is. It comes right to the fore.
How about, I think she sort of reminds me of Kupti up at the beginning of the show, the sense of emotion while singing,
You know,
very different emotion.
What I get from this is more like, who was that lady that was in Paris back in the day?
Josephine Baker.
Josephine Baker, yeah. I get a Josephine Baker vibe from her.
Okay.
And that's what I was trying to bring out, you know, the feathers and the lights and the
Okay.
hands and her singing.
Glamour.
The glamour of it, yeah.
Uh-huh. Interesting. Wow. And then right next to her are two totally meditative back scene
Yeah, well,
photographs.
the one on the top is Joe Temperley, and that's at the end of his career, and he's tired, you know. He's just tired. And he's like 80-something years old, and he's been playing all his life, and he's from Scotland, and he's a phenom. How did he learn how to play jazz like he did in Scotland? But wherever it comes from, it comes, you know?
And then below him is the darling Camille.
Camille, and she's a phenom. She's something. She's a force of nature.
She's fantastic.
She's a force of
Yeah, and
nature.
she's here, and she's also over there.
Oh yeah. She's over there.
In,
And of course, Ahmed.
and of course, Ahmed. You should talk a little bit again about your history with Ahmed Jamal.
He, right out of college, he took me on the road. And you working? And I don't have a job, man. Why don't you come and work with me? I said, all right, what am I gonna do? I said, all right, you just show up. So here I am, working with him, driving across country.
But this is, of course, much later
Yeah,
photograph.
that's much later.
That's in the
Back in
recent.
the day. I got pictures from back in the day where he must have been in his 50s
Yeah,
or 40. Maybe he was
maybe 40s.
late 40s,
Late
you know?
40s,
He was
yeah.
late 40s back in the day.
Yeah,
I think he just had a birthday, wasn't it? 86, something like that.
yeah. The new young talent, the beautiful
the new young
woman.
talent
Yeah.
and the old talent and the new young talent. So you got Houston Person up there, and Sonny Rollins at the bottom, and Veronica Swift in the middle.
And tell me about the red. That's from Gels on the Lights.
That's from Gels on Lights, right?
And these are sort of
And,
8 by.
and this is from Gels on Light, you know, something like that. So the scrim is lit up with gels, and I'm just silhouetting people going on stage. And that's Joe Temperley's baritone.
Right.
That's not a baritone, that's a bass clarinet. That's Joe Temperley's bass clarinet.
Okay. Okay. And one of the things we haven't talked about at all is the fact that you do many of these images in multiple sizes.
Some of them lend themselves to being big, and some of them can remain small.
But some of them that you do small, you also do big.
Right, some of them that I do small do. Most of them can go big, you know? If I print it, if I take the time to print it, that means it's a good image.
Is it an aesthetic decision
It's an
or
aesthetic.
a technical decision or both?
It's an aesthetic decision, mostly. It's not so much technical. Otherwise, that Miles Davis would never blow up because it's got grain, you know, it's so grainy. But the grain still
Just
works.
Makes it something
Yeah,
different.
it makes it something different.
Yeah.
It still works, even big.
Talk a little bit about the things in the case, and then we can end up with the bow. These are ways in which the photographs are used. You want to talk about?
Well, these books, some of the books, some of the catalogs, some of the brochures, some stuff in the newspapers, the New York Times.
These are two great early catalogs.
Two great early catalogs.
One with a commentary by Gordon Parks and one with commentary by Roy de Carava.
Album covers.
And that was a very early work with Winton, 1991.
Right, that was.
Thick in the South.
Yeah, that was a trilogy.
Mm-hmm.
Uptown Ruler, Thick in the South, and something else.
And this was when the Rose Hall opened?
It's Rose Hall, yeah, and this guy, what was his name? Howard Stein.
Right.
Commissioned this book.
Right.
He liked the work so much he commissioned the book.
And we have the bow in the book.
The bow is in the book.
And then we have the bow on the wall, as I thought a good place to end the show.
It's a big bow. It's a nice big bow.
It's a nice big bow. It's
You can
another
see-
one that you've done various sizes.
You can see how the grain is different in this than it is in here,
Than in the miles.
than in the miles, yeah.
And that's because of the,
Well, the way I was developing it, I was a little robust with miles.
okay.
Because I was trying, it was done for ebony. And I was up.
Miles was done for everything.
Yeah, mine was done for ebony.
Yeah.